The samurai did not train to feel calm. They trained to remain unmoved. In the middle of chaos, steel drawn, breath shortened, the mind was not allowed to wander. Thought was a luxury. Hesitation was death. What they discovered was not aggression, but control. A method to command attention so completely that fear had no place to land. The enemy was never the man in front of them. It was the tremor inside the chest. The urge to rush. The urge to freeze. The mind pulling away from the present moment. Modern life has changed the battlefield, but not the mechanism. The nervous system still reacts the same way. Stress fractures attention. Emotion hijacks reason. The mind scatters, then suffers for its own scattering. The samurai observed this long before neuroscience named it. They built discipline not through force, but through a precise internal posture. A way of standing inwardly that made distraction irrelevant. This technique was quiet. Almost invisible. It did not rely on motivation, belief, or positive thinking. It relied on alignment. When alignment was correct, the mind followed naturally. Most people try to control the mind by fighting it. The samurai stepped somewhere else entirely. You may already sense where this path leads. Chapter 1, The Awakening. The awakening never arrives as a revelation. It appears as exhaustion. A samurai did not wake one morning seeking enlightenment. He woke because the same mistake had almost killed him again. The grip tightened too early. The breath rose too high in the chest. The mind raced ahead of the body, imagining outcomes instead of meeting reality. Each time, the result was the same. Loss of precision. Loss of presence. Loss of life, if fortune did not intervene. This is where discipline truly begins. Not in ambition, but in the clear recognition of a repeating failure. The samurai noticed a pattern that most people ignore. Whenever the mind drifted into anticipation or fear, the body followed. Muscles tensed without instruction. Vision narrowed. Hearing dulled. The sword arm moved from habit, not awareness. The more he tried to correct it through effort, the worse it became. This cycle is familiar even now. A student preparing for an exam feels the heart accelerate and forgets what they know. A speaker steps forward and loses their voice. A person under pressure reacts in ways they later regret. The context has changed. The mechanism has not. The samurai understood something subtle. The problem was not weakness. It was misalignment. The mind was trying to control what it could not predict, abandoning what it could command. Attention itself. So the first awakening was not spiritual. It was practical. If the mind could not be trusted under pressure, it had to be retrained before pressure arrived. Not by adding more thought, but by reducing unnecessary movement inside. This was not suppression. It was containment. Like water held by a strong vessel, the mind needed form before freedom. Training shifted. Less obsession with technique, more attention to inner posture. How the body stood when no enemy was present. How the breath settled when nothing demanded it. How awareness rested without searching. At first, this felt unnatural. Without constant mental activity, a strange emptiness appeared. Many abandoned the practice here, mistaking silence for dullness. The samurai stayed. Because in that silence, something else emerged. A steady clarity that did not depend on mood or confidence. A presence that did not fluctuate with circumstance. This was the awakening. Not to power, but to stability. And once stability was tasted, returning to chaos became impossible. Chapter 2, The Ancient Principle. The principle the samurai relied upon was simple, but unforgiving. Where attention rests, the mind follows. Where the mind follows, the body obeys. They called this state Fudoshin. The unmoving mind. Not rigid. Not frozen. Unmoved in the sense that a mountain remains unmoved by passing weather. Wind moves across it. Rain strikes it. The mountain does not chase the storm. This was not a metaphor meant for poetry. It was a functional instruction. The samurai trained attention to settle below thought, anchored in physical sensation. The weight of the body through the feet. The natural rhythm of breath without manipulation. The subtle tension and release of muscles as they stood or moved. Attention was kept local, embodied, immediate. Modern neuroscience would later explain why this worked. When attention remains in direct sensory experience, the brain's threat circuits quiet. The amygdala loses dominance. The prefrontal regions regain coordination. Reaction gives way to response. But the samurai did not need scientific confirmation. They measured truth through survival. The mind, when left unattended, seeks stories. Stories about what might happen. Stories about what has already gone wrong. These stories fragment attention and drain energy. By refusing to follow them, the samurai conserved strength where it mattered. Training was repetitive and deliberately uneventful. Standing for long periods without adjustment. Slow, precise movements executed without emotional charge. Breath allowed to descend naturally into the lower abdomen. Each session rewired the relationship between stimulus and response. At first, the mind rebelled. Boredom arose. Restlessness. Doubt. This was expected. The samurai were taught that resistance was not an obstacle, but a signal that training had begun. Here, a quiet recognition often appeared. Control was never about domination. It was about placement. Place attention correctly, and control emerged on its own. In this moment, something inside you may already be recalibrating. Fudoshin did not make the samurai fearless. Fear still arose. But it no longer dictated action. The mind remained where it was placed, even as the world moved violently around it. This principle extended beyond combat. Eating. Walking. Cleaning a blade. Every action became an opportunity to reinforce unmoving attention. Over time, the distinction between training and living dissolved. There was only presence, sustained and reliable. This is why the technique endured. Not because it was mystical, but because it was precise. And precision, once learned, changes everything. Chapter 3, The Internal War. The real battlefield was never external. It lived inside the nervous system. When danger appeared, the body reacted before thought could form. Heart rate surged. Vision narrowed. Blood shifted toward large muscle groups. Fine motor control diminished. This was not a failure of discipline. It was biology doing exactly what it was designed to do. The samurai observed this without judgment. They noticed that the moment stress arose, the mind split in two directions. One part rushed forward, imagining outcomes, victories, failures. The other pulled backward, clinging to memory and habit. Attention fractured, and with it, precision. This internal war was not between courage and fear. It was between presence and prediction. Modern language would call this sympathetic activation. The body preparing for survival by abandoning subtlety. But subtlety was the samurai's greatest weapon. Without it, strength became clumsy. Speed became reckless. Attempts to suppress fear only intensified it. Attempts to reason with it arrived too late. The samurai learned that the only workable intervention was earlier. At the level of attention itself. They trained to recognize the first signal. A shallow breath. A tightening in the jaw. A narrowing of awareness. These were not enemies. They were indicators. Signals that attention had drifted from the body into imagined time. The moment this drift was detected, attention was returned. Not forcibly. Quietly. To the soles of the feet. To the lower abdomen. To the simple fact of standing or moving. In this return, the war lost momentum. Fear did not disappear. It lost authority. The body remained activated, but coordinated. The mind stayed local. Action emerged cleanly, without excess. There is a moment here that often goes unnoticed. A pause where reaction almost happens, but does not. In that pause, a different identity begins to form. Training this pause required patience. The mind resisted stillness. It demanded stimulation, reassurance, narrative. The samurai allowed the demand to exist without compliance. Each time attention was placed and held, neural patterns softened. What felt like chaos was revealed to be habit. Over months, sometimes years, the internal war changed shape. Instead of constant conflict, there was negotiation. Instead of suppression, there was containment. The nervous system learned that it could remain alert without losing coherence. This was mastery at its most unglamorous. No dramatic breakthroughs. No emotional highs. Just repetition and observation. And slowly, something irreversible occurred. The mind stopped panicking at intensity. It learned that intensity could be inhabited. Once this happened, the external battlefield lost its power to destabilize. Chapter 4, The System. The samurai never relied on inspiration. They relied on systems. A system is what remains when motivation disappears. It is what functions when emotion fluctuates. The samurai understood that the mind could not be trusted to choose discipline in moments of strain. Discipline had to be decided in advance. Their system was built on non-negotiation. Attention was placed deliberately, the same way each day. Posture was assumed without adjustment. Breath was allowed to settle without interference. These were not preferences. They were rules. The purpose was not comfort. It was consistency. Every training session began before thought could interfere. The body moved into position first. Thought followed later, if at all. By doing this, the samurai bypassed internal debate entirely. The system was simple enough to execute under fatigue, fear, or boredom. Complexity was avoided. Anything that required explanation under stress was discarded. One principle governed everything. Do not correct the mind. Place it. When distraction appeared, it was not analyzed. When resistance arose, it was not negotiated with. Attention was returned again and again to the chosen anchor. Feet. Breath. Movement. This repetition created identity. Not in theory, but in the nervous system. The body learned what was expected of it. The mind learned where it belonged. Over time, this produced a profound shift. Discipline no longer felt imposed. It felt natural. Like standing upright or keeping balance while walking. Here, something subtle happens. Control stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like gravity. The system extended into daily life. Eating was done with full attention. Walking was used to stabilize breath. Even rest was structured. The samurai rested without collapsing into distraction. This did not make life rigid. It made it reliable. Most people fail not because they lack willpower, but because they ask the mind to decide too often. The samurai removed decision from the equation. The system decided. The individual followed. There is a quiet moment in this process when excuses lose their voice. Once the system was ingrained, stress no longer disrupted it. Stress became another condition the system could operate within. Training and combat ceased to be separate states. The mind, no longer burdened with choice, became clear. This was the hidden strength of the samurai. Not ferocity. Not endurance. But a system so precise that the mind had nowhere to escape. And when the mind cannot escape, it finally becomes still. Chapter 5, Practice without gaps. Discipline collapses not from intensity, but from inconsistency. The samurai understood this with brutal clarity. A single lapse was never just a single lapse. It was a fracture in rhythm. Once rhythm broke, the mind began negotiating again. Once negotiation returned, discipline decayed. So they practiced without gaps. This did not mean perfection. It meant continuity. Training was never judged by quality, only by presence. Some days the body was heavy. Some days the mind resisted. Some days attention wandered endlessly. None of this mattered. What mattered was that the practice occurred exactly as prescribed. If the body could stand, it stood. If it could breathe, it breathed. If attention drifted, it was returned. No drama. No correction of mood. No waiting for the right internal state. This is where most people fail. They believe discipline should feel aligned before it begins. The samurai reversed this logic. Alignment was the result of beginning. Even minimal practice preserved the thread. A shortened session still counted. A distracted session still counted. The only unacceptable outcome was absence. This approach removed the all-or-nothing trap. Missing one day was not catastrophic, but it was treated as a warning. The samurai knew that gaps widen quickly if left unaddressed. So they built redundancy. If one form of practice was impossible, another replaced it. If formal training was disrupted, attention was trained through walking, cleaning, eating. The thread was never allowed to snap. Over time, this produced a quiet transformation. Discipline stopped feeling fragile. It no longer depended on ideal conditions. It adapted. Here, a strange thing happens. The mind begins to trust the system. Anxiety about maintaining discipline fades. Effort decreases. Continuity becomes automatic. This is the stage where practice stops being something you do and becomes something you are. There is a moment in this process when you realize you are no longer starting over. You are simply continuing. The samurai valued this state above all others. Because in combat, there is no reset. There is only continuation under pressure. Practice without gaps trained the nervous system to remain organized even when disrupted. Mistakes no longer caused collapse. They were absorbed. This principle applies far beyond combat. Relationships. Study. Craft. Emotional regulation. Wherever gaps appear, instability follows. Wherever continuity is preserved, strength accumulates quietly. The samurai never rushed transformation. They trusted accumulation. And accumulation, when uninterrupted, becomes inevitability. Chapter 6, Identity Collapse. Before transformation, something must fail. The samurai reached a point where effort no longer worked. The techniques were correct. The system was intact. Practice continued without gaps. And yet, a subtle tension remained. A sense of holding on. A quiet struggle to maintain control. This was not a flaw in training. It was the last remnant of the old identity. The mind had learned discipline, but it still believed it was the one enforcing it. This belief created friction. Control was being applied from the surface, not arising from depth. Under extreme pressure, this difference mattered. The collapse began quietly. Moments arose when the samurai could no longer tell whether he was controlling the mind or simply witnessing it. Attention stayed placed without effort. Reaction slowed without intention. The familiar sense of "I am doing this" started to dissolve. At first, this felt like weakness. Without the familiar internal commander, there was uncertainty. A fear of losing edge. A fear of becoming passive. Many turned back here. Those who continued discovered something unsettling. Control had never belonged to the self they were protecting. It belonged to the structure beneath it. As this realization deepened, the old identity began to fall apart. The identity that needed credit. The identity that feared failure. The identity that measured itself against outcomes. This collapse was not dramatic. There was no crisis. Just a gradual irrelevance of the old narrative. Action still occurred. Discipline remained. But there was less internal commentary. Less self-reference. Less effort spent maintaining an image of strength. The samurai became quieter inside. In this quiet, perception sharpened. Without the need to defend an identity, attention expanded naturally. The body responded fluidly. Decisions emerged without hesitation. This was not detachment. It was intimacy with the present moment, unfiltered by self-concern. The old identity had been useful. It built the system. It enforced continuity. But it could not survive mastery. It was designed for effort, not ease. Letting it collapse required trust. Trust that discipline had moved deeper than personality. Trust that the system would function without supervision. There is a moment here that feels like stepping into open air. No guarantees. No internal authority issuing commands. Just presence meeting reality directly. This is where true control begins to look like surrender. Not surrender to chaos, but surrender of unnecessary control. The samurai did not become softer. He became simpler. And simplicity, once embodied, cannot be taken away. Chapter 7, Transformation. Transformation did not arrive as a reward. It arrived as a consequence. The samurai no longer thought about controlling the mind. The question had dissolved. Attention settled where it needed to be without instruction. Breath moved without supervision. Action emerged without delay. What changed was not behavior, but orientation. Before, discipline was something applied to life. Now, discipline was the ground life stood on. There was no effort to remain present, because presence was no longer an act. It was the default state. This is the final shift. Control ceases to be a strategy and becomes a condition. The nervous system, trained through continuity and stripped of excess identity, no longer overreacted to intensity. Stress still appeared, but it passed through cleanly. Emotion still arose, but it did not dominate. Thought still existed, but it did not lead. The samurai did not become fearless. Fear simply lost its central position. What replaced it was clarity. A clarity that did not analyze, justify, or rehearse. It responded. In this state, the distinction between inner and outer disappeared. Movement felt inevitable. Decisions felt obvious. There was no sense of choosing correctly. Only of acting appropriately. This is why the technique was never advertised. It could not be sold or explained quickly. It demanded time, repetition, and the willingness to let an old self dissolve. But once embodied, it was irreversible. The samurai could return to ordinary life, but something fundamental had shifted. Distraction no longer felt attractive. Chaos no longer felt threatening. Silence no longer felt empty. The mind had learned its place. This transformation extended beyond combat. Conflict in relationships softened. Work became precise instead of draining. Solitude became restorative rather than restless. Nothing magical occurred. Nothing external changed. Yet everything functioned differently. This is the quiet paradox of mastery. From the outside, it looks unremarkable. From the inside, it is unshakable. The samurai did not walk away with answers. He walked away with stability. And stability, once internalized, answers most questions before they are asked. The ancient technique survives because it aligns with how the mind actually works. Not how we wish it would work. Control was never about tightening the grip. It was about standing so clearly in the present that the mind had nowhere else to go. Now, consider this carefully. If your mind no longer needed to be controlled, who would you be then? Conclusion. The samurai path was never about becoming exceptional. It was about becoming unshakable. What endures from their discipline is not technique, posture, or ritual, but orientation. A way of meeting life without fragmentation. A way of standing inside experience without being pulled apart by it. The ancient method did not promise comfort. It promised coherence. When attention is placed correctly, the mind stops wandering. When the mind stops wandering, life stops leaking energy. This is why the practice survives time and context. Because it does not depend on belief. It depends on structure. Structure held long enough becomes nature. Most people search for control through effort. The samurai discovered it through removal. Removing excess thought. Removing unnecessary identity. Removing the habit of leaving the present moment. What remains is not emptiness. It is clarity without strain. You do not need a battlefield to test this. Pressure appears everywhere. In silence. In conflict. In repetition. Each moment reveals whether attention is scattered or settled. The path is not dramatic. It is quiet. Almost invisible. But once walked far enough, it alters how everything is met. The mind learns its place. The body regains trust. Life becomes workable again. This is not a destination. It is a stance. And once that stance is taken, it does not announce itself. It simply holds. You may already feel where this ends.